Zelensky is ready for elections during the war. Trump issues a tough ultimatum to Ukraine. The US is leaving NATO. The bill is already in Congress. An attack in Transnistria, a Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group in Odesa and Venice. Trump's new peace plan has been published. A Korean scenario for Ukraine. A sensational statement from Syrskyi. The Ukrainian armed forces are retaking Pokrovsk. This has never happened before. A Russian Shadow Fleet tanker has been seized in a Ukrainian port. Hello, my name is Katerina Nestorenko, and right now let's talk about the main news. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you across the vastness of YouTube. Zelensky is ready for new presidential elections in Ukraine. This statement was made by the head of state himself, and he asked to ensure security for holding elections during the war. I'll say right away that I'm ready for the elections. To be honest, I'm ready for the elections. Another issue is, I've heard hints that we're clinging to power or that I personally am holding on to the president's chair. And that's why the war isn't ending. But honestly, that's a completely unreasonable story. An unreasonable story. This is an obvious reaction to yet another statement from Trump that Ukraine should hold elections. Well, while Zelensky is waiting for proposals from the deputies, at the same time he himself was recognized as one of the most influential politicians in the world. According to Politico, the Ukrainian president is ranked 14th. By the way, each person on the list has been given a certain tagline for their activities. Next to Zelensky, for example, it says Joker in the deck. But as they say, there's always one in the family. Well, you get the idea. Putin is ranked 5th on the list with the tagline Provocateur. And Trump is in first place with the label next to him reading Transatlantic Shockwave. Creative. What do you think of these results? Are you ready for new presidential elections in Ukraine during the war? And by the way, speaking of Trump, the media reports that he has given President Zelensky an ultimatum regarding the deadline for Ukraine's response to the peace agreement. And the deadline is December 24th before Christmas. Western media are also reporting on the intense pressure from the United States on Ukraine and the actual coercion towards capitulation. Meanwhile, in the states themselves, preparations are underway to withdraw from NATO, and this is no longer just rumors or statements, but concrete actions. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has introduced the corresponding bill.
NATO is a relic of the Cold War. The United States should leave the alliance and direct that money toward defending our own country, not other states. Today I introduced H.R. 6508 to end U.S. membership in NATO. In
fact, such actions are quite expected from the states, but the main question is something else. Will Trump be able to pressure Ukraine and our European partners and force them to make concessions to Putin? Share your opinion in the comments. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We, Ukrainians, are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode which country you're watching from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. Of evil? I always enjoy reading your comments. But for now, let's continue. Coming up is the most interesting part. To divide Ukraine according to the Korean scenario, money for Russia, NATO's Article 5 to protect Ukraine, and restrictions for the Ukrainian armed forces. This is exactly the idea the US has right now. According to journalists from the Washington Post, the new peace plan now consists of 20 points. Let me remind you, previously there were 28. Now the plan itself is divided into 3 documents. A peace plan, security guarantees, and an economic recovery plan. Interestingly, after Ukraine's amendments, for the first time, specific deadlines for Ukraine's accession to the European Union are set there. That is the year 2027. It is noted that the US is putting pressure on Hungary to open the doors for Ukraine. This will help develop trade and investment and will be monitored. The country's rampant corruption. Along the line of ceasefire from Donetsk region to Kherson, it is proposed to create a demilitarized zone, behind which there will be a deeper zone where the deployment of heavy weaponry will be prohibited. There is also discussion about raising the army limit. Previously, they wanted to limit the size of the Ukrainian army to 600,000 soldiers. Now they are already proposing 800,000. But Ukraine refuses any formal restrictions. And the same Korean scenario. After all, there are ongoing discussions about exchanging territories and drawing borders. But earlier, Zelensky personally stated that Ukraine has no constitutional, international, or moral right to give up its territories. The issue of territory remains the most difficult and contentious. It is also proposed that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will be under US control, so that neither Ukraine nor Russia manages the facility. The US will provide Ukraine with security guarantees similar to Article 5. Ukraine wants ratification by Congress. Ukraine's sovereignty will also be protected from any Russian veto. By the way, for the reconstruction of Ukraine, the Trump administration proposes to allocate $100 billion from frozen assets of the Russian Federation. This amount could be higher. Moreover, American officials are negotiating with the World Bank to create a Ukrainian development fund which will attract $400 billion for reconstruction. Now, what's interesting, Trump wants similar investments for Russia as well. Whether the terms will change is unknown, and whether Zelensky will respond before Christmas as Trump wants is also unknown. But the fact remains. Trump does not consider Russia an aggressor if he wants to secure privileges for it. Meanwhile, Lavrov commented on the peace plan that Witko brought to Russia in his own way. As Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated, the US proposals mention the need to ensure the rights of national minorities in Ukraine and religious freedoms. But how truthful this information is remains a mystery. The Kremlin spokesman also stated that any hostile actions, including the deployment of European troops in Ukraine, will receive a response from the Russian Federation. But he immediately added that Russia supposedly does not intend to go to war with Europe. He says that Russia and the US have even reached agreements to continue working on resolving the war in Ukraine. Of course, he referred to the war as a conflict. He even praised Trump. He says that Trump is the only one who understands the root causes of the situation in Ukraine. But for some reason, according to Lavrov, the American president is only increasing sanctions against the Russian Federation and is in no hurry to lift them. It's like he commented, but at the same time, he's contradicting himself. It seems like they reached an agreement, but at the same time, Trump isn't exactly ready to indulge Putin in everything. In short, the negotiations are ongoing. And what do you think? When will we see the results of these negotiations? Write your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, as journalists report, citing their sources in the security services, there is a risk of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrating Odesa and Vinnytsia. Russia has urgently launched operations in Transnistria. Mobilization has been intensified there, and active drone production and operator training have also begun. A new offensive? And now, to the front lines. The encirclement of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers in the Pokrovsk direction is fake. This was stated by Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi.
We are not fighting for ruins. We are not fighting for building foundations. When defense loses all meaning, I give the order and we pull our units back to preserve our soldiers. This also explains the fact that the Russian army is advancing slowly. That's better for us.
Syrskyi also added that the Russian advance comes at the cost of daily losses of more than 1,000 men. That is a negligible result. In November alone, the enemy's losses inflicted solely by our drone forces amounted to about 24,000 men. This is a record figure. At the same time, however, the commander-in-chief said that the enemy is building up its grouping in the Pokrovsk direction to 156,000 men. And now this is the main theater of military operations. At
a certain period in the fall, there were no Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk. But since November 15th, about 13 square kilometers out of the city's 29 square kilometers have been brought under control. The northern part of the city lies along the railway line. To the west, about 54 square kilometers are under control.
Syrskyi also emphasized that Ukraine is increasing the size of its grouping within Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, our soldiers are writing on social media about the heavy fighting in this direction. And here are the shots of the Russians hanging up their tricolor rag in Ostapovskoye. The Russians were tasked with advancing about 9 kilometers into the rear of Ukraine's defense forces and raising their flag on video. The enemy has already announced control and clearing of the village using footage with this tricolor.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
But as this flag bearer was leaving, he ran into 2 Ukrainian FPV drones, and the village is under full control of the Ukrainian armed forces. I hope this fate awaits every occupier who sets foot on Ukrainian soil. But let's talk in more detail about what Syrskyi called the main theater of military operations. On the deep state map, Murad is now completely surrounded by a gray zone. The situation in Pokrovsk remains extremely difficult. We will tell and show you the details of what is happening on the front line in our military review.
What?
A nighttime drone raid in Cheboksary. According to Russian reports, the local thermal power plant was damaged. Another piece of good news from the Ukrainian defenders. On December 5th, SBU drones struck a liquefied gas terminal in the Russian port of Temryuk. As a result of the attack, more than 20 out of the 30 available storage tanks burned down. In addition, railroad tank cars were destroyed. Life is anything but boring for the residents of Kursk region. People whose homes were destroyed and looted by Putin's army took to the streets in protest after the cancellation of payments that compensated displaced persons for rental housing. Fighters of Free Ichkeria, who are fighting on the side of Ukraine, have challenged Ramzan Kadyrov to a meeting. Whether Kadyrov will come to meet with his fellow citizens is unclear.
We're calling you out. Yes, just name the place, the houses. Come on, give us a house, a location, a house.
Well, while Ramzan is searching for his own path, the situation on the Russian-Ukrainian war front
remains incredibly difficult. Obviously, in terms of the sheer intensity of the ongoing fighting, this is undoubtedly the most challenging and difficult period we have experienced. Our troops were not informed about this for several days. Today, we managed to straighten the front line, to withdraw from those gray zones that existed in the area, for example, of Sukoyag and Lisovka, because there were corresponding threats there. We managed to preserve our personnel and, as I already mentioned, to withdraw them from these dangerous areas and to continue today. The defensive operation continues both in the Pokrovsk area and directly in Mirnohrad.
The armed forces of Ukraine are holding back the enemy in the Kupiansk and Huliaipol directions.
All locations are important today, primarily because these are key settlements for our logistics. Including the Huliaipol direction, this gives the enemy the opportunity to focus on fire strikes, on fire control over our logistics on the Zaporizhzhia front over at least several locations accordingly. That is why the enemy is currently making such attempts at active combat operations, trying to carry out full-scale offensive actions. However, for now, the defense forces have managed to stop the enemy and, so to speak, establish a new line of defense, making use of the local terrain as well. And the enemy's attempts to infiltrate the settlement itself are being suppressed as much as possible today.
In the Lyman direction, the enemy has started using heavy armored vehicles. In the Alexandrovsk direction, 2 Ukrainian defenders from the 67th Brigade captured 6 occupiers. Another prisoner from the Dobropoli direction was taken by our fighters from the 82nd Brigade. In the video is Andrei Kudyakov, who signed a contract with the occupying army because of debts, something he now regrets.
I am deeply disappointed in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. What is stated in the contract does not match what is actually written.
Putin plans to replenish the ranks of the occupying army, or more precisely, to cover losses with new blood. That is why he signed a decree for another round of reservist call-ups, which will take place in Russia as early as 2026.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they are watching us. The shadow fleet of the Russian Federation is going too far. The security service of Ukraine arrested a vessel from the Russian shadow fleet right in the port of Ukrainian Odesa. According to the case materials, the owner of this ship was under sanctions by the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. And in order to circumvent the restrictions, he regularly changed the vessel's name and the formal beneficiaries from third countries. The vessel was used to illegally export metal and agricultural products.
SBU officers uncovered a dry cargo ship controlled by Russia in the commercial port of Odesa, where it arrived under the flag of an African country to export a shipment of steel pipes. It was established that on the eve of the full-scale war, the vessel had docked in Sevastopol at least 7 times for the illegal export of agricultural products in Russia's interests.
At the time the vessel was detained, there were 16 crew members and the captain on board. All of them are citizens of several Middle Eastern countries. During the searches, a voyage plan, cartographic materials, and radio communication logs were found, containing evidence of illegal entry into temporarily occupied ports. Territories of Ukraine, the vessel was arrested and a criminal case has been opened. In the occupied territories, the Russians are ramping up the expulsion of Ukrainians and increasingly settling these areas with Russians. Now, Russia has legalized the mass seizure of housing in the occupied territories of Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, a law has been passed in Russia allowing the occupation authorities to declare housing as ownerless and then sell it to new occupants. And this mechanism will remain in effect until 2030. The document itself does not specify clear criteria, so both people who left because of the war and those who still remain at home are at risk. The housing is planned to be distributed among Russian military personnel, security forces, and officials who are being brought into the occupied regions. Ukrainian forces are proving successful not only in naval battles but also in the oil war. Russia has lost yet another oil refinery. After an attack by Ukrainian drones, the Syzran oil refinery was forced to shut down. In fact, here's how it was burning. According to Reuters journalists, citing their sources on December 5th during the attack, the AVT-6 primary oil processing unit was damaged. This is the plant's key equipment, which had already been hit before. The facility processes up to almost 9 million tons of oil annually. Well, processed. Now the refinery's operations have been halted. And when will it be restored? No one knows. NATO has full control over the Baltic Sea and is ready for an attack from Kaliningrad. This was stated on Sunday. On December 7th, the head of the NATO military committee, Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, made this announcement. Russian propaganda is already hysterical about this. Will a war between Russia and NATO really start with Kaliningrad? More on this coming up.
The starting point for a war between Russia and NATO begins with the Kaliningrad region.
Kaliningrad is undoubtedly one of Russia's most important regions, our outpost in the west.
The Kremlin is preparing new provocations.
The Russian Federation is deliberately escalating conflicts.
The alliance has declared its readiness to strike Kaliningrad. The Kaliningrad region is the westernmost region of the Russian Federation and is an exclave completely separated from the main territory of Russia by other countries. The Russians have effectively turned the Kaliningrad region into a military base. The main formations include ground forces, aviation, as well as the largest naval base of the Baltic Fleet.
The topic of the Kaliningrad region emerged precisely at the moment when the United States was making its maximum effort regarding the end of the war in Ukraine. And in my opinion, it is specifically the Kaliningrad region and the possibility of direct confrontation with the NATO bloc. The Russian Federation is trying to divert the attention of the United States from the Ukrainian issue, or it is creating a precedent for a so-called exchange.
Kaliningrad very often becomes the center of Russian saber rattling. In this way, Putin is testing the waters of NATO's capabilities. For example, during the joint Zapad 2025 exercises with Belarus, the military practiced combat operations on the territory of the Kaliningrad region, after which the Kremlin deployed Iskander missiles there, posing a threat to 6 alliance countries.
Provocations specifically from the territory of the Kaliningrad region. This includes jamming GPS signals, both maritime and aviation components. This, accordingly, is the redeployment within the territory of the Kaliningrad region. The same Iskander systems, S-400 surface-to-air missile complexes, and other active defense and strike assets of the occupying country's army. In other words, the Kaliningrad region is currently being militarized.
At the same time, Russian propaganda continues its campaign of spreading disinformation about NATO countries preparing to attack Russia.
This concerns possible sanctions from EU countries at the moment, including a blockade of the Russian exclave, the Kaliningrad region. And the Russian Federation claims that such a decision by EU countries would set a precedent for the possible use of armed force at that moment. The lifting of this blockade. The Russian Federation makes it clear that, accordingly, the possibility of the EU imposing economic sanctions at the time of the blockade of the Russian exclave will be perceived by the Russian Federation as the creation of a casus belli, that is, as grounds for the Russian Federation to use armed force.
Back in July, NATO allies announced that they had developed a plan to neutralize the Kaliningrad region. which is intended to counter threats from Russia and ensure global deterrence.
NATO countries are carrying out priority measures to strengthen the defense capabilities of these countries and, accordingly, to reduce the possibility of a direct invasion of the territory of Poland and Lithuania. This includes the redeployment of additional military contingents, conducting joint exercises including land, sea, and air components, as well as, accordingly, the development of plans for the possible blockade of the Kaliningrad region.
Russia is interested in there being disagreements within the alliance that needs division and the undermining of unity in order to create a serious crisis within NATO. But it is unlikely to succeed.
Europe is desperately fighting for Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and French President Emmanuel Macron advocate for the frozen Kremlin assets to be used exclusively in the interests of Ukraine. Western partners are also constantly pressuring Trump on the issue of peace negotiations, defending the position of official Kyiv. Meanwhile, things are going extremely badly in Russia itself. Sanctions are finally crippling the Russian economy.
Europe continues to fight for Ukraine. Today in Brussels, decisions are being made that just a year ago seemed impossible. The European Union has found a legal loophole that allows it to block Russian assets without the unanimous consent of all member states.
The published text is a complex legal document that tries to resolve two contradictions: to provide money to Ukraine without direct costs for member states and to make decisions without the unanimity that is currently required. The result is complicated, but it might work.
Essentially, EU countries are getting themselves out of a trap they set for themselves at the start of the full-scale war. All these years, the fate of frozen Russian assets depended on the moods of one or two countries willing to block any decision. Now, however, Brussels is using a mechanism designed for cases of economic shocks. And Russia's war against Ukraine has been officially recognized as just such a shock. Meanwhile, in European capitals, they are already preparing a move that could become the biggest financial blow to Russia. During the entire rule of the bunker dweller, the European Commission has proposed allocating 210 billion euros in support to Ukraine by 2027. And a significant portion of these funds is supposed to come specifically from frozen Russian assets. 185 billion are held in the Belgian depository Euroclear, with another approximately 25 billion in accounts in other EU countries.
Germany will provide 25% of the support, which is the largest share among all countries.
This is especially important now, as it is Belgium, the country where Euroclear is located, that has been slowing down the process in recent months, fearing legal consequences that could impact its own financial system.
Belgium is more concerned than anyone else that Russia might later try to reclaim these assets through the courts. And in that case, Belgium would need the support of other countries. And that's why all the European countries that support Merz's idea are also trying to persuade Belgium. I think that in the end they will succeed.
And while the fate of Russian assets is being decided in Brussels, European leaders are fighting on another diplomatic front. The key figures in this remain the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It is they, together with the Ukrainian government, who continue to defend Kyiv's interests before the United States.
We all support Ukraine and we all stand together. Peace and peace negotiations in order to achieve a sustainable, lasting peace. And I believe that much now is in our hands. Funding, the quality of equipment and training for the Ukrainian army, these are the facts. That Ukraine is resisting in this war, and also that the Russian economy is beginning to suffer, especially after our latest sanctions and those of the United States. And now, as it seems to me, the main issue is bringing our common positions, those of Europeans, Ukrainians, and the United States, closer together, in order to conclude these peace negotiations and once again strengthen trust under the best possible conditions for Ukraine, for Europeans, and for our collective security.
But let's return to the sanctions and their consequences for Russia. Analysts from The Insider have found that the sanctions are literally breaking the supply chains for Russian weapons production. The country is unable to fully carry out complex chemical processing. Access to the necessary reagents is closed off. Imports of strategic chemicals have plummeted. It's especially difficult. All of this has hit the production of rocket fuel, a critical sector without which modern weaponry is impossible.
Probably first there was the full-scale war in Russia, and then in September there was a recorded decline in weapons production. Now, the problems that were talked about 6 months ago are already affecting Russia's military-industrial complex. But
the effect of the sanctions could be even stronger. For example, the main intelligence directorate is calling for restrictions on the entire production chain. Because right now, 13 out of 49 Russian companies involved in the creation of missiles like the Iskander-M are still not under sanctions.
Just recently, Europe announced that it is ready to give Ukraine Russia's frozen assets to provide financial assistance. Of course, Russia is very unhappy about this, since we're talking about billions, so they decided to take decisive action. No, not to go to war, but to pray. According to Russian journalists citing their sources, the Kremlin has instructed the church to pray so that Russian assets do not end up in Ukraine's hands.
Europeans are getting closer to financing the Kiev regime using Russia's frozen assets. They are, of course, a bit afraid, so for now they're behaving properly. They aren't handing over the funds to our enemy, but those bastards are overcoming their fears. We must not give this money to anyone, but our means of influencing Europe are now very limited. As often happens in a difficult situation, they've turned to the church to pray that God will enlighten the Europeans and prevent the financing of Ukraine at our expense. And at the same time, we'll identify those responsible within our own ranks for the fact that Russia did end up losing the money.
Interestingly, the Russian church has confirmed this assignment. It's curious. Why are Russians so sure that God is on their side? As we can see, he isn't helping them at all. What do you think of our news? Write to us about what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.